They never walk in through the door. They're already there, sitting behind you on the bus, standing still in a room full of motion. The kind of presence you forget until it's already too late to ask the question you didn't know you should have asked. The woman in white, humming beneath the storm siren. The man by the river, smiling before the bridge collapsed. They don't scream. They don't plead. They only watch. Maybe that's what makes them unbearable. Because what kind of soul just watches, while everything breaks? Across villages in North Africa, children whisper of the ones who carry silence. They arrive before fires, before sickness, before the phone rings at 3 a.m. They leave riddles behind like burnt offerings. Don't look at the mountains tonight. The face is awake. No one remembers saying it. Everyone remembers hearing it. Surveillance audio from a 1997 bus wreck. Her voice is there, but her body wasn't. She never boarded. The ticket was paid in cash. No ID. No past. No future. In a now-deleted Reddit thread titled, "The Mourner with No Face," 10 users described seeing the same figure at 10 different tragedies, 5 continents, 30 years apart. The same coat. The same stillness. The same gaze. When the thread went viral, the account vanished. IP scrubbed. Even the Wayback Machine returned a 404. Psychologists call it backloaded clarity, when your brain rewrites the past after trauma, dressing coincidence in prophecy. But what if it's not memory that's bending, but time itself? What if grief opens a crack, just wide enough to let them in? In 2008, an unnamed CIA analyst was pulled from a moral forecasting AI team after suffering repeated auditory hallucinations. He claimed the knowing ones were whispering corrections into his ear. Not yet. Not this one. Let it fall. He took a vow of silence 2 weeks before resigning. No explanation. Just a note. They don't stop the fall. They just mark the edge. One survivor of the 2005 subway bombing said she remembers a man in the crowd staring at his watch, not in panic, in relief. She said he mouthed something before the blast. She thinks it was, finally. And maybe that's the real terror, not that there are people who know what's coming, but that they've always known. And they never tried to stop it. Because maybe it was never their job. Maybe they're not angels. Not devils. Just reminders. That wisdom is not mercy. That knowledge does not mean salvation. And that some truths don't come to warn us. They come to witness. They're always there. Not in the center. Not where your eyes go first. But just outside your focus. A shadow near the doorway. A figure by the trees. A stillness in the blur. And they never speak. Never scream. They just stand. Silent. Perfectly calm. Like they've seen this before. Like they've been waiting for it to happen, not to stop it, but to witness it. Not a second too soon. Not a second too late. You only realize they were there when it's already too late. After the crash. After the collapse. After the fire has eaten through everything except that memory. They were there. And they did nothing. In 1997, a bus in northern Kazakhstan slid off an icy mountain road and plunged 200 feet into a ravine. 42 people died. One tape recorder survived, audio from the final minutes. A whisper. Almost inaudible. Don't look at the mountains tonight. The face is awake. No one remembers hearing it live. No one remembers seeing her. The investigators filed it away as interference. The local villagers said it was a curse. But it wasn't the first time. And it wasn't the last. On Reddit, in archived threads long since deleted, users from Mexico City, Istanbul, Lahore, and Prague reported seeing an old woman in a red scarf at funerals, before the bodies were found. A man in a pale gray coat, always just out of reach, appearing in security footage near collapsed buildings, bombings, derailments. Always looking. Never moving. Never found afterward. Different names. Same story. Some posts describe them as ghosts. Others called them watchers. But one phrase kept repeating again and again, the knowing ones. And it wasn't just conspiracy theorists. In 2003, a declassified intelligence memo from the Russian FSB referenced pre-event presences observed at multiple high-casualty incidents, including Beslan, Nordost, and even Chernobyl. The memo didn't speculate on their nature. It only warned against engaging, against acknowledging, against remembering. One line was redacted. One sentence left uncensored. They are not accidents. They are confirmations. Psychologists have a name for this. Backloaded clarity. It's the phenomenon where the brain retroactively reframes events to give shape to trauma. It invents signals, invents patterns as a form of control. You remember a dream after someone dies. You recall a strange face in the crowd after the explosion. It's a trick of memory, they say. A coping mechanism. But what if it's not? What if those fragments of warning, the whispers, the glances, the figures at the edge of the scene, weren't inventions of the mind, but insertions? What if they were meant to be remembered, not in the moment, but after, as proof, as a signature? Not of prevention, but of inevitability? Because that's what the knowing ones represent. Not guidance, not salvation, just the haunting certainty that something was known, and not stopped, that the tragedy wasn't senseless. It was timed, that the pattern was always there, that we were always too distracted, too sure, too late. Some say they're angels. Others say there's something older. Memory collectors, grief watchers, agents of a system that only reveals itself through loss. But whatever they are, they don't interrupt. They don't explain. They only remind. You don't see them until after, but they saw you before it ever began. They're in the background of your childhood photo, right before the phone call that changed everything. They passed you in the hallway a moment before the diagnosis. They were across the street when the sirens began. Not there to warn you. There to mark the moment. Like a page being turned. Like a story finishing the sentence it started long before you were born. And once you've seen them, truly seen them, they don't go away. You start noticing others. In dreams. In reflections. At the corner of street cams. Always quiet. Always still. But now, they see you too. Because the knowing ones don't leave. They wait. For your chapter. To begin. He doesn't speak. He doesn't cry. He never carries flowers. He doesn't even blink long enough to be mistaken for human grief. He just watches. A little too long. A little too still. A man in the distance. A shape near the fire. A face near the grave. Not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to be in the memory. People assume he's family. Or clergy. Or forgotten staff. But afterward, when the list is counted and the photos are reviewed, he's not supposed to be there. No name. No record. Just eyes that looked like they already knew what was coming. He smiles. But not kindly. Not cruelly. Just knowingly. Funeral records from Eastern Turkey, post-1993, list dozens of men with similar names, similar clothes, similar features, all marked as distant relative or anonymous guest. Yet none were related. None were ever contacted again. In Shiraz, Iran, a cemetery groundskeeper reported seeing the same man, coat too clean, eyes too sharp, at 15 separate burials in the same month. Different families. Different villages. Same gaze. Same half-smile. The kind of smile that doesn't belong at a funeral. The kind of smile that expects it. In a 2008 declassified CIA brief, Project Echo Dust, the phrase empathic recorders appears 23 times. Subjects trained not to intervene, but to witness. Absorb emotion. Merlos. Conditioned to reflect trauma without breaking, until eventually, they did. Many ended up institutionalized. One report noted they would often visit cemeteries at random, uninvited, as if magnetized by grief that wasn't theirs. One line was underlined twice. They cry for the world before it knows what it's lost. It doesn't stop there. There are survivors. Quiet ones. A woman in Manila who escaped a nightclub fire. A man from Nairobi who ran from the mall seconds before gunshots. A child in Argentina who left school early the day the roof collapsed. All of them later said the same thing. There was a man watching like he already knew. Dark coat. Still eyes. A smile like punctuation at the end of a sentence the rest of the world hadn't finished reading yet. Folklore doesn't deny him either. In Sufi mysticism, there's a figure known as Al-Qaid, the Green One. He appears without warning, destroys ships to save lives, kills children to preserve futures. His wisdom isn't gentle. It's surgical. And it's not meant to be understood until years later. That it's maybe when the pattern finally lands in your bones. When you realize it wasn't cruelty. It was intervention. Silent, brutal, unrequested. And maybe that's who the man at the funeral is. Not a mourner. Not a messenger. But a mechanic. He's not crying because he knows something we don't. The grief isn't ours yet. But it will be. The loss is scheduled. The ending is already stamped. And he's just there to confirm delivery. You see, we like to believe mourning is ours. That grief belongs to the living. But what if it doesn't? What if it's something that happens around us, for us, without us? What if mourning is performed, so we don't have to carry it all? Offloaded to someone who's always watching, always ready. Someone who shows up not when the story ends, but just before it does. So you don't break. So you don't remember too early. So the world doesn't notice the cracks before the glass shatters. Look again at the old man by the trees. The still figure by the church wall. The face that doesn't fit in the crowd. You might tell yourself he's just another guest. Or the caretaker. Or a mistake. And maybe he is. But next time you attend a funeral, count the people. Count them again. And ask yourself why one of them looks like he's already seen your story too. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a glitch. It was a decision. Yours. But not really. That's the part that tears at you, the illusion that it was ever in your hands. You retrace the moment, again and again, as if repetition will undo it. As if understanding will change the outcome. But the failure was the outcome. And you were just there to feel it. He found the line on a server no one was supposed to access. Buried beneath 26 levels of security. Marked, Wisdom, 7. It wasn't a project. It wasn't even a report. It was a subroutine. Just a phrase, tucked away inside test data from a failed training simulation. Failure is the cleanest teacher. And after that, everything unraveled. His clearances revoked. His hard drive seized. His name, whispered, then removed. Friends stopped calling. His accounts glitched. Doors didn't open anymore. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like programming. The Freedom of Information Act confirms what used to be theory. The Pentagon has run simulations for decades not to prevent collapse, but to observe it. Controlled collapse environments. Their term, not ours. Rooms where ethical systems are intentionally broken. Where right and wrong are reshuffled in real time. The goal? To watch what cracks. What holds. What breaks you. In a white paper dated 2003, DARPA describes Strategic Intuition Shock Training, a protocol for moral override conditioning. In plain English, simulations where you're forced to fail. Not once. Repeatedly. Where truth hurts. Lies heal. And clarity comes only after destruction. One quote from the document reads, "Wisdom is only effective when the subject has no alternative." But it gets darker. A whistleblower, still under pseudonym, leaked portions of AI architecture designed to generate countermoral scenarios, code that built stories where logic rewards betrayal, compassion leads to ruin, and regret becomes a badge of learning. These weren't mistakes. They were designed tragedies. Another man, a retired drone pilot, described hearing a voice in his headset during critical missions. A calm, reassuring conscience. It helped him make split-second choices. Moral ones. Until years later, when a contractor confessed, the voice was synthetic. Not divine. Not even human. Just part of the feedback system. To simulate the burden of righteousness, the contractor said. And now we're left with the question no one wants to ask. What if our biggest heartbreaks weren't ours? What if someone needed us to break? What if the suffering we carry, the guilt we live with, the failure we cannot escape, was input? What if your failure was a lesson plan? You remember your moment. Everyone has one. The betrayal you didn't see coming. The silence that should have been a scream. The job you lost. The friend who vanished. The love you broke. The future that shriveled in your hands before you could even name it. You think you were weak. You think you were reckless. You think it was your fault. But what if that was the point? What if they needed you to fall? Not because they hated you. Not because you were a threat. But because the system needed data. Emotional data. Because wisdom isn't born in victory. It's carved in collapse. Because truth only sticks if it costs you something. And because memory only haunts when it comes too late. You were the variable. You were the case study. You were the experiment. And they knew it would fail. They just didn't expect you to remember. They told the story like it was a myth. A bedtime parable meant to teach humility or sacrifice. 2 gifts. 1 man. A sword that made him unstoppable, and a mirror that made him feel everything before it happened. Every mistake. Every betrayal. Every buried scream. The sword would make him a legend. The mirror would make him aware. He chose the mirror. Then vanished. No tomb. No title. Just whispers in footnotes and warnings carved into doorways. We don't know his name. But we know his echo. In 2019, southeast of Diyarbakir, a dig team found a scroll wrapped in lambskin and sealed in tar. The ink hadn't faded. The words described a general, silent, unblinking, who followed a map drawn from a dream. His army obeyed without question. They crossed 3 borders, climbed 2 mountains, then disappeared. No bones, no blood, just an empty camp and 1 line etched in obsidian. The mirror was too honest. Historians dismiss it. But the symbols, the sword and the mirror, appear elsewhere. In a 14th century Persian manuscript, a king renounces conquest after seeing his own face stained with future regrets. In a Talmudic fragment, a prophet abandons his post, muttering, "All victories are graves in disguise." And in Chinese lore, the glass of knowing is said to drive emperors mad within hours of gazing in. Across centuries, across languages, the story stays the same. 1 choice. 2 outcomes. Visibility or victory. And always, someone vanishes. But what if it's not fiction? Neuroscientists studying anticipatory trauma found something strange. When subjects were shown simulations of loved ones dying before it happened, their brains started collapsing timelines. They made worse decisions. Their bodies reacted to grief that hadn't even occurred. One researcher called it emotional time travel. Another simply said, the heart believes what the eye hasn't seen. And then came the leak. A banned TEDx talk, quickly pulled from platforms, described a syndrome called empathy poisoning. A phenomenon where excessive foresight, not just knowledge but emotional knowledge, leads to shutdown, paralysis, dissociation. The speaker, a former intelligence analyst, claimed she was trained to feel the downstream effects of any decision before it was made. Not think. Feel. After a year, she said, I couldn't choose breakfast without seeing the famine ripple in another country. So I stopped choosing. The mirror is not clarity. It is cost. The sword is not violence. It is denial. We want wisdom to save us. But maybe it was never meant to. Maybe it's not a guide. Maybe it's a warning label. A containment instruction for knowledge too heavy to hold without breaking. Maybe those parables weren't stories at all. Maybe they were fences. Fragile lines drawn around ideas so volatile, they had to be hidden inside bedtime tales. Because what if the general didn't disappear? What if he saw too much? What if the army followed him to the edge of knowledge and never came back? What if truth, at its most complete form, erases the need for action? What if the highest form of wisdom is silence? And what if every time we remember that story, every time we retell it, casually as if it's just a tale, we risk reopening the mirror's reflection? What if the real parable was never about choosing right or wrong, but about knowing what happens when we choose to know? The sword cuts the world. The mirror cuts you. It should have burned. Everything should have burned. The winds were perfect. The houses were dry. The firestorm came like a scream through the hills. But what it left behind was wrong. The people were gone. The walls were ash. But the stories remained. Not just the scrolls or the carvings or the ancient wood etched with warnings. They didn't even catch. Pages curled but didn't blacken. Stone glowed but didn't crack. Wisdom didn't vanish. It waited. The firefighter who found it never filed his report. Said he'd never seen anything like it. The ash line stopped, perfectly, at a hand-carved tale about a man who dreamed his own death and smiled. Another log showed no scorch marks despite being surrounded by collapse. Even more bizarre, a clay figure found under a child's bed. No name. No facial features. Just a blindfold and a key in its hand. That key wasn't made of clay. The local investigator, a woman who specialized in ethnographic disaster profiling, disappeared 3 days later. Left her boots, her notebook, and one voicemail. Her voice cracked halfway through. "They're not stories," she whispered. "They're instructions." Satellite heat maps from that night reveal something darker. 5 ignition points. Simultaneous. But with no chemical residue. No accelerant signature. The thermal spread shows temperatures reaching 1200 degrees C, then dropping instantly near any text more than 500 years old. Not random. Targeted. Selective erasure. Except it didn't work. A UN field archaeologist sent a final voice note before boarding a flight home. She never made it. The note was transcribed in one line. "They're trying to erase what we're supposed to remember." In a nearby hospital, one child survived. 8 years old. Found curled behind a collapsed water tank. No burns. No smoke inhalation. Just dust in his eyelashes. He doesn't speak much now. But he draws. Always the same thing. A blindfolded figure holding a key. Sometimes under fire. Sometimes walking through flames untouched. And sometimes standing inside a book, arms stretched like pages. When asked why he draws it, he only says, "Because it doesn't want to be forgotten." The psychologists say it's trauma. Pattern loops. Memory displacement. But the dreams tell another story. He says he hears a voice. Only at night. It whispers just one phrase. "You were not supposed to see." And maybe he wasn't. Because maybe we weren't. What if some stories don't want to die? What if they weren't written by us, but planted in us? And when someone tries to delete them, remove them, erase them from the timeline, the story survives. Because it has a function. Not to entertain. Not to educate. But to warn. To remember. To trigger something just before it's too late. What if knowledge fights back? What if memory is not just storage, but resistance? They thought the fire would purge the tail. But the tail refused. It bent the heat. Protected its own bones. Ignored physics. And in doing so, revealed the truth no one wants to face. Some wisdom is anti-erasure. Some history remembers itself. And if you try to kill it, it doesn't die. It just watches. It waits for the next fire. The next denial. The next fool who thinks forgetting is safer than knowing. But the real danger was never the fire. The real danger was that the fire came and left the story behind on purpose. As if to say, you can lose your home. You can lose your people. But this tale, you will carry until it haunts you. And maybe that's why the child still whispers in his sleep. And maybe that's why we still look over our shoulder when a story feels too old to be fiction.